I still remember the sound of the clock ticking that morning. It was a slow, steady sound, but to me, it felt louder than my heartbeat. It was the day my world shattered in seconds. And the strangest part? No one asked why. Not even the people I had spent my whole life loving. My name is Mary, and I never thought I would tell this story out loud. I always believed families stayed together, no matter how many storms came their way. I believed love was enough. I believed kindness was enough. And I believed that if I gave my heart to my family, they would hold it gently. But life doesn't always follow the stories we create in our mind. That morning, the sun was rising, and the kitchen smelled like warm toast. I had woken up early, as I always did, to prepare breakfast for my son Daniel and my daughter-in-law Emily. I wasn't living with them permanently. Just for a few weeks. Or at least, that's what I thought. Emily walked into the kitchen with her arms folded. She didn't greet me. She didn't smile. Her face was calm, but her eyes were tired, as if she had been carrying something heavy in her chest for a long time. "Mary, we need to talk," she said. Those words, "we need to talk," have broken more hearts than any storm, any accident, any tragedy. Because they never lead to anything good. I wiped my hands on my apron and nodded gently. "What is it, dear?" She looked down for a moment before speaking. "Maybe, it's time for you to go back home." Just like that. No softness. No warmth. No explanation. I didn't cry. I didn't even blink. I just stood there, feeling something inside me crack quietly, like thin glass breaking under a slow, steady pressure. I smiled instead. A small, tired smile. "All right," I whispered. I don't think Emily expected that. Maybe she wanted a reaction. Maybe she wanted an argument. But I had none left in me. Daniel came into the room a few minutes later, and when he saw us standing there, he sensed something was wrong. But he didn't ask. He didn't look into my eyes. He didn't hold my hand like he used to when he was little and scared of thunderstorms. He just sighed softly and said, "Mom, maybe Emily is right." That was it. My own son. The child I raised with late-night feedings, scraped knees, and small birthday cakes made from whatever we could afford. He couldn't even ask me why I looked so pale. Why my voice was shaking. Why I packed my bags without a word. No one asked why. Not then. Not later. Not until much, much later, when the truth finally made its way to the surface. But by then, the damage was already done. I grew up in a small town in Ohio, in a house with old windows, creaky floors, and warm memories. My mother used to say, "Family is the only home that never disappears." I believed her. For a long time, that belief shaped everything in my life. I married Michael when I was 24. He was a quiet man, kind at heart, gentle in his ways. He was the type who warmed his hands before touching a baby's cheek, the type who whispered instead of shouted, the type who held back tears until no one was looking. We built a simple life together, nothing fancy, nothing grand. Just love, faith, and routine. When our son Daniel was born, Michael held him like he was carrying the whole world. I still remember how Daniel's tiny fingers wrapped around just one of Michael's. It looked like hope, pure and small. We weren't perfect parents. We weren't wealthy or wise. But we tried. We tried every day. Then, 10 years ago, Michael passed away from heart complications. It was sudden. Unexpected. And it changed everything. Daniel was already married to Emily by then. They lived in a neat suburban neighborhood with clean sidewalks and trimmed hedges. Emily worked as a financial analyst. Daniel was building his career in IT support. And me? I found myself alone in a house that felt too big, too quiet, too full of memories that echoed through the walls. Daniel would visit sometimes. Emily came only on holidays. But I never complained. I told myself they were busy. I told myself they were building their future. I told myself I didn't want to be a burden. But loneliness. Loneliness has a way of creeping in quietly, settling into the corners of your heart like dust. When Daniel suggested I stay with them for a few weeks after I slipped on the porch and sprained my wrist, I agreed. I thought, maybe this was my chance to feel like a mother again. A grandmother. A part of something. I didn't know that the warmth I was hoping for had faded long before I arrived. Emily wasn't unkind, but she wasn't warm either. She kept her distance, moved around the house like I was a guest, or worse, a stranger. I stayed out of the way. I cleaned what I could. I stayed quiet. But something was shifting in that house. And I didn't see it clearly until the morning she told me to leave. I settled into their home gently, the way a person enters a quiet room in the middle of the night, slowly, softly, hoping not to disturb anyone. I kept my steps light, my voice lower than usual, and my needs small. Old habits, I suppose. When you've lived alone long enough, you learn how to shrink yourself so others feel comfortable. Daniel tried in his own way. Every morning before leaving for work, he would peek into the kitchen and say, "Morning, Mom," with a quick smile. But it wasn't the smile I remembered from his childhood, the wide, bright one that showed he was truly happy to see me. This one was rushed. Uncertain. Thin, like a thread that might break with one more pull. Emily rarely joined us for breakfast. She liked to start her mornings in silence, sipping black coffee while scrolling through her emails. She once said she used the early hours to prepare her mind for the day, but I always felt like I was intruding on that space. Their daughter, little Sophie, was the warmest part of the house. At 6 years old, she still carried the innocence adults seem to lose the moment responsibilities settle on their shoulders. She would run up to me with her curly brown hair bouncing behind her and shout, "Grandma, come see what I drew." And just like that, the entire house felt brighter. Sophie and I spent afternoons coloring, baking small cookies that made a mess of the kitchen, or reading stories while she curled up beside me with a blanket. But even those sweet moments made Emily uneasy. She never said it outright, but her eyes followed us, watching, measuring, judging. I could feel the tension like a cold draft sneaking in through a cracked window. I tried to understand her. She lived a busy life, managed a stressful job, and ran a home with routines and rules. She liked things in a certain order. My presence disrupted that order, no matter how quietly I moved. One afternoon, I was folding laundry, not because Emily asked, but because I wanted to help, when she walked in with her arms crossed. "Oh, Mary, you didn't have to do that," she said. Her words were polite, but her tone felt sharp. As if she were saying, "This is my house. My responsibility. My territory." I smiled softly. "I don't mind at all. It keeps me busy." She hesitated. Then sighed. "It's just, sometimes, when you do things your way, I forget how I normally do them. It throws me off." I paused, holding Daniel's shirt in my hands. "I'm sorry, Emily. I don't want to make things harder for you." Her expression softened just a little, but not enough to erase the distance between us. "It's fine," she replied quietly. "Maybe just, leave the laundry to me." I nodded. I always nodded. Agreeing was easier than creating ripples in calm water. Daniel wasn't home enough to notice these small moments. He worked long hours, often coming back tired, carrying stress in his shoulders and silence in his voice. He loved Emily, that much was clear, and he trusted her judgment on most things, including anything related to the household. I didn't blame him. Marriage changes people. It shifts priorities. It rewrites the map of a person's heart. But there were times, late at night, when I lay awake on the guest room bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering whether I had somehow shifted too far away from his map altogether. I tried to remind myself that this stay was temporary. Just a few weeks until my wrist healed completely. Just a little time with my son and his family. But as the days passed, the house seemed to grow smaller. Colder. Quieter. Emily spoke to me when needed, but always briefly. Her eyes avoided mine in a way that made me feel like a problem she didn't know how to address. And Daniel, he tried to bridge the gap, but he didn't see how wide it had become. One Saturday morning, Daniel invited me to join him and Sophie at the park. Emily stayed home to finish some paperwork. It was the first time in weeks I saw my son relax, truly relax. He pushed Sophie on the swings, laughing when she squealed with joy. For a moment, I saw the boy he used to be. The boy who followed me around the house with a toy car in one hand and questions in the other. As we walked home, I asked gently, "Daniel, is everything all right?" He glanced at me with a confused smile. "Yeah, Mom." "Why?" I shrugged. "Things feel a bit tense around the house." He let out a long breath. "Emily's just stressed. Work, bills, schedules, you know how it is." I nodded, though I wasn't sure I truly did. I had lived a simpler life. We didn't have much, but we had time. We had space to breathe. We had each other. When we returned home, Emily stood at the doorway, her expression unreadable. She greeted Sophie warmly, kissed Daniel on the cheek, and gave me a smile that felt like a thin sheet of ice. I didn't know it then, but Emily had already made up her mind about something. Something that would soon tear the floor from beneath my feet. The house felt tighter after that day. Conversations shorter. Smiles weaker. Silences longer. I could sense something approaching, like a quiet storm gathering behind a distant hill. I didn't know what it was. I didn't know how close it was. But it was coming. And when it arrived, it would change my life in ways I wasn't prepared for. The days following that quiet Saturday felt heavier than usual. You know how sometimes the air in a house can change, even if no one says a word. How a room can feel colder, even when the temperature stays the same. That was how Emily and Daniel's home began to feel. Like something invisible had shifted, and I was standing in the middle of it, unsure if I caused the shift or simply walked into it at the wrong time. Emily wasn't cruel, that is important to say. She wasn't loud. She wasn't disrespectful. But she carried a tension around her like a second skin, and somehow, I had become the thing that rubbed against it the wrong way. Small things turned into big things. Quiet moments turned into awkward ones. And even though no one spoke about it directly, the silence spoke louder than any argument ever could. The first sign. One morning, I woke up early, as usual, and went to the kitchen to prepare a small breakfast for Sophie. She loved when I made her scrambled eggs, the fluffy way, as she called it. I cracked the eggs into the bowl, whisking them gently. The house was peaceful. Still. The kind of quiet that feels safe. Until Emily walked in. She froze for a moment when she saw the bowl in my hand. "Oh," she said softly, I already planned to make Sophie's breakfast today." I smiled. "I didn't know, dear." "I can stop." "It's fine," she interrupted quickly. But her voice didn't sound fine. Her jaw tightened. Her arms folded. Her eyes darted around the kitchen, landing on things slightly out of place, a towel I had hung differently, a spoon I had set on the wrong side of the stove. Then she said something so small, yet so heavy. "It's hard for me to keep things the way I like when other people move things around." Her tone wasn't angry, but it was lined with discomfort, the kind that makes a person shrink without being told to. I lowered my gaze. I'm sorry. I'll be more careful. She didn't reply. She simply took a deep breath, brushed past me, and began rearranging things quietly. And that was the first moment I felt truly out of place. Little moments that hurt more than they should. As the week went on, tiny things kept building, nothing dramatic, nothing anyone else might notice. But I felt them. When I folded Sophie's clothes, Emily refolded them later. When I washed the dishes, she washed some again as if the water in my hands wasn't warm enough. When I helped Sophie with her homework, Emily gently took over and said, "I'll handle it, Mary. Her teacher wants it done a specific way." These weren't acts of hostility. No. They were acts of control. Of territory. Of ownership over a space I belonged to only temporarily, and perhaps never fully belonged to at all. I understood the boundaries. I really did. But every correction, every small adjustment, every polite, "I'll take care of that," chipped away at the little confidence I had left. Daniel didn't see any of it. He came home tired, carrying the exhaustion of long workdays. He kissed Emily on the cheek, hugged Sophie, and greeted me with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Some evenings, he sat beside me on the couch. "How's your wrist, Mom?" "Better every day," I said, keeping the sadness out of my voice. Sometimes he nodded, sometimes he looked at his phone, sometimes he talked about work. But not once did he notice the way I hesitated before speaking, or how often I stayed silent so the house wouldn't feel crowded. The night I overheard them. Everything changed the night I overheard a conversation I was never meant to hear. It was a Thursday evening. Soft rain tapped against the windows, and Sophie was asleep. I was in the guest room folding the sweater Grace had brought me during her visit that morning. Emily and Daniel were in the hallway. I didn't intend to listen, truly, I didn't. But their voices drifted through the crack under the door. "Dan, I don't know how much longer I can handle this," Emily whispered. My heart paused. Daniel sighed. "What happened now?" "It's not one thing. It's everything. She's always here." "She's here because she's still recovering," Daniel said gently. "I know," Emily replied. "But she changes the way the house feels. She changes my routine. She changes how I breathe." How I breathe. Those words cut deeper than she would ever know. Daniel stayed quiet a long moment. Then he said, "Maybe she just wants to feel useful." "I understand that, Dan," Emily said, her voice softening. "I really do. But I feel like I'm losing control of my own home. I work all day. I come home tired. And then, things aren't where I left them. My rhythm is off. My space feels different." I swallowed hard. I didn't even realize I was holding my breath. Then she said the line that burned itself into my memory. "I feel like I can't breathe in my own house." It was as if someone had taken a needle and pushed it slowly into my heart. Not enough to kill. Just enough to remind me I was fragile. Daniel's voice followed, low and tired. I'll talk to her." And just like that, the ground beneath me shifted. The conversation that never happened. I waited the entire next day for Daniel to say something, anything. But he didn't. He left for work early. Emily drove Sophie to school. The house was quiet. I made myself a small cup of tea and sat by the window, staring at the gray sky. My hands trembled a little, not because of fear, but because of the realization settling in my bones. I was a guest in a home that no longer had room for me. A mother who had become an inconvenience. A presence that made breathing harder for the woman my son loved. Even if Daniel didn't say the words aloud, his silence was loud enough. A quiet distance forms. From that day on, Emily stopped trying to hide her discomfort. Not in a rude way, but in a real way. She spoke less, avoided the kitchen when I was in it, spent more time working in her home office. Daniel grew distant too, though he didn't mean to. He was overwhelmed by life, by work, by the constant pressure to provide. I saw it in the dark circles under his eyes. He wasn't avoiding me out of anger. He was avoiding a conversation he didn't want to have. Even little Sophie sensed it. Children always do. She became quieter, watching the adults around her with soft concern. One evening, she climbed onto my lap and whispered, "Grandma, is Mommy mad at you?" I hugged her gently and kissed the top of her head. "No, sweetheart," I whispered. "Sometimes grown-ups just get tired." But the truth sat like a stone in my throat. Yes. Emily was upset. Not because of anything I could point to. But because of everything I was, an aging mother, alone, needing a place to stay for a while. A reminder of something she didn't want in her perfectly organized life. And then, the moment came. The moment when Emily stopped holding back. The moment when Daniel stopped pretending everything was fine. The moment when the quiet tension finally grew into something sharp. The moment that would break me. In just a few seconds. And no one would ask why. The next morning felt unusually quiet. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, the heavy, loaded kind. Like the air itself knew something was about to happen. I woke up early, out of habit, and walked gently to the kitchen. The house was still dark except for the soft glow from under the oven light. I made myself a cup of warm water with honey. It soothed my throat and gave my hands something to hold on to, something steady. But as soon as I set my cup on the counter, I heard footsteps coming down the stairs. Emily. Her hair was pulled back in a tight ponytail. Her face was calm, but not relaxed. There was a stiffness around her eyes, the kind that comes from holding something in for too long. "Morning, Mary," she said softly. "Good morning, dear." I tried to smile. I tried to sound warm. But my heart was already bracing itself. She moved around the kitchen quietly, opening drawers, running water, setting up the coffee pot, all without looking at me. Every small movement felt intentional, controlled, measured. Finally, without turning around, she spoke. "Mary, can we talk later today?" Those words again. The ones that come before change. Before endings. Before hearts break. A gentle chill ran through me. I held on to the edge of the counter. "Of course," I whispered. She didn't say anything else. She finished making her coffee and left the room as quietly as she entered. I stood there long after she was gone, staring at the steam rising from my cup. The honeyed water tasted bitter that morning. Signs I could no longer ignore. Throughout the day, the house felt different. Emily was quieter than usual, moving with purpose, like she had rehearsed something in her mind and was waiting for the right moment to say it. Daniel texted me around noon. "Mom, I'll be home a little early today. We should talk." Just reading the words made my stomach tighten. We should talk. I had heard those words once before, years ago, when the doctor told me Michael's heart wasn't going to hold on. Words like that carry weight. They don't come unless something is about to shift. I busied myself with small tasks around the house, wiping down the counters, organizing my things, brushing Sophie's hair after school, but everything felt distant, like I was watching myself go through the motions. Sophie noticed, of course. She tugged at my hand at one point and asked, "Grandma, are you sad?" I knelt down to her level and forced a smile. "No, sweetheart. Just thinking about things." She nodded like she understood more than I said. Children, they always feel the truth before adults do. Daniel's early return. Daniel walked into the house around 5. His shoulders were tense, his tie slightly loosened, his eyes tired in a way that seemed deeper than usual. He hugged Sophie, kissed her forehead, and sent her upstairs to play in her room. Then he turned to Emily. A silent look was exchanged between them, one I wasn't meant to see. A look that said, "Are you ready?" And yes. My heart sank. "Mom," Daniel said gently, "can we sit for a minute?" The three of us sat around the dining table. The same table where we once shared laughter, little stories, and simple meals. But now it felt like a courtroom. And I was the only one without a lawyer. Emily folded her hands. Daniel took a breath. And I sat still, waiting for the storm I knew was coming. The words that broke me. Daniel started slowly. "Mom, first, we want you to know we love you." A sentence like that always comes before something painful. Emily nodded, though her eyes stayed down. "We're glad you've been able to stay with us while you heal," Daniel continued. "But Emily and we've been talking." That was the moment my heart held its breath. He looked at me with gentle eyes, the same eyes he had as a boy, but there was something behind them now. Something resigned. "Mom," he said softly, "maybe it's time for you to go back home." My hands trembled under the table. Emily added quickly, "Your wrist is much better now. And we didn't want to pressure you, but it feels like, maybe we need our space again." Our space. The words hit harder than I expected. Daniel reached for my hand, but I gently moved it away before he touched me. "I didn't want you to hear it like this," he whispered. "I wanted to find the right time. But Emily's been overwhelmed, and honestly, I have too." I nodded slowly. My throat was tight. Emily's voice softened, but the words still stung. "We're not asking you to leave tonight. We just think, it's best if you start preparing." Preparing. Like I was an event that needed to be cleared away. The silence after the storm. I wanted to speak. I wanted to say something, anything. But no words came. Instead, I sat there, staring at the table's wooden grain lines, tracing them with my eyes like they held answers I couldn't find. Daniel's voice broke the silence. "Mom, are you okay?" And that was when it hit me. He didn't ask why I suddenly looked so pale. He didn't ask why my hands were shaking. He didn't ask why their decision felt like a knife slipping quietly into my heart. He just asked if I was okay. In a way that told me he didn't truly want the answer. I nodded. Because that was easier. "That's fine," I whispered finally. "If you both need space. I understand." Emily let out a slow breath, almost relieved. Daniel rubbed his forehead, looking exhausted. "We're not trying to hurt you," he said. A quiet smile formed on my face. "I know." But inside, something broke. Not loudly. Not violently. Just a soft crack. The kind you hear only if you're paying attention. And no one was. The moment alone. After the conversation, I excused myself and went to the guest room. The door clicked behind me, and the house suddenly felt too warm. Too bright. Too full of people who didn't see the storm inside me. I sat on the bed and let the silence swallow me. For the first time since losing Michael. I felt truly alone. Not lonely. Alone. Loneliness is when you miss someone. Alone is when no one notices you're breaking. I looked at the suitcase in the corner of the room. Still half filled with clothes from the day I arrived. I realized I had never fully unpacked. Maybe some part of me knew. Knew this stay wasn't meant to last. Knew I belonged somewhere else, even if that place was an empty house filled with the memories of a life long gone. Then, something unexpected happened. A soft knock on the door. "Grandma." Sophie's voice. I wiped the corner of my eyes and steadied my breathing. "Yes, sweetheart. Come in." She opened the door slowly and climbed onto my lap without a word. Then she looked at me with big, tear-filled eyes. "Grandma, why are you sad?" This time. I couldn't lie. I didn't tell her what happened. I didn't say the words out loud. I just held her. And that was the only moment in the entire house where someone felt the change in my heartbeat. Someone noticed. Someone cared enough to ask. Emily nodded, though her eyes stayed down. "We're glad you've been able to stay with us while you heal," Daniel continued. "But Emily and we've been talking." That was the moment my heart held its breath. He looked at me with gentle eyes, the same eyes he had as a boy, but there was something behind them now. Something resigned. "Mom," he said softly, "maybe it's time for you to go back home." My hands trembled under the table. Emily added quickly, "Your wrist is much better now. And we didn't want to pressure you, but it feels like, maybe we need our space again." Our space. The words hit harder than I expected. Daniel reached for my hand, but I gently moved it away before he touched me. "I didn't want you to hear it like this," he whispered. "I wanted to find the right time. But Emily's been overwhelmed, and honestly, I have too." I nodded slowly. My throat was tight. Emily's voice softened, but the words still stung. "We're not asking you to leave tonight. We just think it's best if you start preparing." Preparing. Like I was an event that needed to be cleared away. The silence after the storm. I wanted to speak. I wanted to say something, anything. But no words came. Instead, I sat there, staring at the table's wooden grain lines, tracing them with my eyes like they held answers I couldn't find. Daniel's voice broke the silence. "Mom, are you okay?" And that was when it hit me. He didn't ask why I suddenly looked so pale. He didn't ask why my hands were shaking. He didn't ask why their decision felt like a knife slipping quietly into my heart. He just asked if I was okay. In a way that told me he didn't truly want the answer. I nodded. Because that was easier. "That's fine," I whispered finally. "If you both need space. I understand." Emily let out a slow breath, almost relieved. Daniel rubbed his forehead, looking exhausted. "We're not trying to hurt you," he said. A quiet smile formed on my face. "I know." But inside, something broke. Not loudly. Not violently. Just a soft crack. The kind you hear only if you're paying attention. And no one was. The moment alone. After the conversation, I excused myself and went to the guest room. The door clicked behind me, and the house suddenly felt too warm. Too bright. Too full of people who didn't see the storm inside me. I sat on the bed and let the silence swallow me. For the first time since losing Michael, I felt truly alone. Not lonely. Alone. Loneliness is when you miss someone. Alone is when no one notices you're breaking. I looked at the suitcase in the corner of the room. Still half filled with clothes from the day I arrived. I realized I had never fully unpacked. Maybe some part of me knew. Knew this stay wasn't meant to last. Knew I belonged somewhere else, even if that place was an empty house filled with the memories of a life long gone. Then, something unexpected happened. A soft knock on the door. "Grandma." Sophie's voice. I wiped the corner of my eyes and steadied my breathing. "Yes, sweetheart. Come in." She opened the door slowly and climbed onto my lap without a word. Then she looked at me with big, tear-filled eyes. "Grandma, why are you sad?" This time. I couldn't lie. I didn't tell her what happened. I didn't say the words out loud. I just held her. And that was the only moment in the entire house where someone felt the change in my heartbeat. Someone noticed. Someone cared enough to ask. The moment everything breaks, the emotional core of the story begins. The morning after Sophie found me crying was strangely bright. Sunlight filled the kitchen, warm and golden, spilling across the countertops like nothing in the world had changed. But everything had. I woke up with a heaviness I couldn't shake, the kind you feel in your bones even before your eyes open. It wasn't sadness alone. It wasn't disappointment alone. It was something deeper. A quiet ache that whispered, "You don't belong here anymore." When I stepped into the hallway, the house felt different. Emily and Daniel were talking in hushed tones near the living room doorway. Their voices stopped the moment they saw me. "Oh, good morning, Mom," Daniel said, trying to sound normal. Emily offered a small, quick smile. Too quick. The kind of smile you give when you're trying to hide the truth behind it. I nodded and walked to the kitchen. The floorboard creaked beneath my foot, the same way it did every morning, but today, even that familiar sound felt foreign. I poured myself some tea, holding the warm cup with both hands to stop them from trembling. I had always been good at pretending everything was fine. Mothers learn to do that early in life. But inside, something was shifting. The talk before the breaking point. Mid-morning, Daniel knocked gently on the guest room door. "Mom? Can we talk for a minute?" I took a breath and opened it. He stepped inside, looking tired, conflicted, almost guilty. He sat on the edge of the bed, hands clasped together. "I hope you're not upset about yesterday," he began quietly. I sat beside him. "I'm not upset," I lied softly. "I understand." He nodded but didn't look convinced. "Emily didn't mean to come across harsh. She's been overwhelmed. And, she wanted me to make sure you understood. She didn't want you to think she was pushing you out." A small, brittle laugh escaped me before I could stop it. "Daniel," I said gently, "that is exactly what she did." He froze. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I simply told the truth the way a tired heart tells it, softly, honestly, without anger. "I love being here," I continued. "I love spending time with you and Sophie. But I can feel when I'm not wanted, son. I've lived long enough to know the difference." He swallowed hard. "Mom, she doesn't want you gone. She just wants her life back the way it was," I finished. He lowered his head. He didn't deny it. And that silence, that tiny pause where a son chooses peace in his marriage over truth with his mother. That was the beginning of the real turning point. The day everything snapped quietly. It happened 2 days later. A Sunday afternoon. One of those gentle weather days when the air feels soft and the sky looks freshly washed. I decided to bake cookies with Sophie, her favorite activity with me. She ran around the kitchen gathering ingredients, her laughter echoing against the cabinets. "Grandma, can we add extra chocolate chips?" she asked. "Of course," I smiled. "It's our secret recipe." Her face lit up like a spark. We were mixing the dough when Emily walked in. The moment she saw the flour on the counter, the opened sugar jar, the chocolate chips scattered like tiny pebbles, her expression tightened. Not angry. Just tense. "Mom," she said softly, "I just cleaned the kitchen." "I'll clean everything when we're done," I replied gently. She opened her mouth to say something, but paused when she saw Sophie's excitement. Emily wasn't heartless. She wasn't cruel. But she was tired. And tired people sometimes breathe differently. She forced a smile. "Just, be careful, okay?" Then she left. Sophie dipped her spoon into the dough and giggled. "Mommy gets stressed too much," she whispered innocently. I didn't respond. Because truth spoken through a child's voice can hurt more than truth spoken by anyone else. The accident that shouldn't have been one. When the cookies were done, I set them on the rack to cool. Sophie grabbed one too early, of course, and dropped a crumb on the floor. Oops, she giggled, reaching down to pick it up. Leave it, sweetheart, I said. Grandma will get it. I bent down to wipe the floor, and that was when it happened. A sharp pain shot through my wrist, the same wrist that had been healing. I tried to steady myself on the counter, but the ache made my hand slip slightly. Just slightly. But enough. A glass bowl on the edge of the counter tipped over and crashed to the floor, shattering into bright, sharp pieces. The sound echoed like a gunshot through the quiet house. Sophie gasped. I froze. And then Emily came running in. What happened? Her eyes went wide at the broken pieces scattered across the tiles. I'm so sorry, I said quickly. It just slipped. Mom, she said, louder than usual, this is exactly what I was worried about. Sophie stepped behind me, startled. I'll clean it, I whispered. But Emily kept going. This house is not safe with glass everywhere. What if Sophie stepped on it? What if she got hurt? Her voice wasn't cruel, but it was sharp, sharper than the broken pieces on the floor. My chest tightened. Daniel came rushing in behind her. Everything okay? Emily pointed at the shards. Mary dropped a bowl. Sophie was right here. This is why I'm stressed, Dan. This is why I can't do this anymore. I felt heat rise in my face. Not anger. Shame. I'm so sorry, I repeated softly. Daniel sighed heavily, rubbing his forehead. Not once did he ask if I was hurt. Not once did he kneel to check my wrist. Not once did he ask why the bowl slipped in the first place. He just said, Mom, maybe we should move up the plan. That was it. The moment. The moment my world shattered in seconds. Move up the plan. Move me. Out. Even Sophie looked confused. But Grandma didn't mean to, she whispered. Emily's shoulders softened at her daughter's words, but her voice didn't change. I know she didn't. But accidents like this, we can't keep having them. I felt something inside me, something tender, something fragile, fold in on itself. It didn't make a sound. Not a crack. Not a snap. Just a quiet collapse. I stood there, surrounded by broken glass, and realized. No one asked why. Why my hand shook. Why my wrist still hurt. Why tears were forming in my eyes. No one asked anything. They were only waiting for me to agree. So I nodded. All right, I whispered. And with that single word, everything changed. I cleaned the glass slowly, piece by piece, making sure none of it touched Sophie's bare feet. She stayed close to me, holding the edge of my shirt, sensing my sadness even if she didn't understand it. Emily stood near the counter with her arms folded. Daniel stood behind her, hands in his pockets, looking anywhere except at my face. He wasn't angry. He wasn't cold. He was simply absent. Present in the room, but nowhere near me. When the last shard was wiped away, I washed my hands under the cold water. The sting of the water against the tiny cut on my palm felt sharper than it should have. But I didn't say anything. When I turned around, Daniel spoke softly. Mom, maybe we should aim for this weekend. This weekend. Not some distant date. Not when you're ready. Just a few days. I nodded again. Because that was all I could do. Emily softened her voice, the way someone does when the hardest part has already been said. It's for the best, Mary. We don't want you getting hurt, or Sophie getting hurt. Her words were meant to soothe, but they landed like stones on my heart. Sophie, the only one who saw me break. After the kitchen incident, Sophie followed me everywhere. She sat near me while I read. She drew me pictures of hearts and houses and stuck-figure families holding hands. She even brought me her favorite stuffed rabbit, placing it gently on my lap. "Grandma, are you going home forever?" she asked one evening, her little voice trembling. I pulled her close, kissing the top of her soft hair. "No, sweetheart. I'll still visit. But Mommy said you can't stay here anymore. Children hear everything. Everything adults hope they don't." I held her tighter. "Sometimes grown-ups make decisions that feel confusing," I whispered. "But it doesn't change how much I love you." She looked up at me with teary eyes. "I don't want you to go." Her voice cracked on the last word. And that was the moment my tears fell silently onto her small shoulder. The night before I left. The house was quiet again, but not the peaceful quiet from weeks ago. This quiet was heavy. Dense. Guilt and tension wrapped into still air. Daniel came to my room that night. He sat down slowly, the mattress dipping under his weight. "Mom. I'm sorry it turned out like this." I looked at him, my son, my boy, and tried to memorize the features of his face. Because I knew from this day forward, things would never be the same. "I'm not angry," I said softly. He rubbed his palms together. "I just want you to be comfortable. Your house, it's your space. Your routine. You'll feel more at ease there." "I thought I'd feel more at ease with my family," I said without bitterness, only quiet truth. He swallowed. "Emily didn't mean for it to come to this." "I know," I whispered. But knowing didn't make it hurt less. He looked down at the floor, and for just a moment, I saw that small boy again, the one who used to run to me during thunderstorms. The one who would hold my hand tightly because my presence made the world feel safe. And I wondered, when did my presence start making his world feel complicated instead of safe? Before he left the room, he said, "We'll visit soon. I promise." I wanted to believe him. But promises said in guilt are the first ones people forget. The final morning in that house. The morning I left, the sun was bright again, almost mocking in its warmth. I moved through the house quietly, packing my things while trying not to make the walls feel heavier than they already did. Emily stayed upstairs longer than usual. Daniel pretended to read emails at the kitchen table. The only one who acted normal was Sophie. She ran to me with a drawing she had stayed up late making. It was of the two of us standing in front of my house. She had drawn herself holding my hand. "This is for you, Grandma," she whispered. "So you don't forget me." I knelt, my knees aching as I lowered myself to her height. "Oh sweetheart," I said, my voice trembling. "I could never forget you." She wrapped her arms around my neck, holding on with all the strength her tiny body could muster. And then, through her quiet tears, she asked, "Why are you leaving? Did I do something wrong?" My heart cracked wide open. "No, my love," I whispered, brushing her hair gently. "You did everything right. This is not your fault." Emily appeared then. She stood awkwardly, looking unsure whether she should interrupt the moment or stay quiet. Daniel finally spoke. "We should get your bags in the car." I stood up slowly, my body feeling heavier than it had in years. Daniel carried my suitcase. Emily followed at a distance. Sophie clung to my hand until the last possible moment. The goodbye that changed everything. At the front door, I turned back one last time. The house looked so familiar and yet, so distant. Like a place I once belonged to in a different lifetime. Daniel hugged me. "Call me when you get home, okay?" I nodded. Emily stepped forward, hesitated, then hugged me too. "Take care of yourself, Mary," she said softly. I nodded again, though inside, I felt like pieces of me were being left behind, small pieces that would never fully return. Sophie was the hardest. She wrapped her arms around my leg, tears dripping onto the floor. "Don't go," she whispered. I knelt again and hugged her with every bit of strength I had left. "I'll see you soon, I promise," I said softly. Even though I didn't know when soon would be. Then Daniel guided her inside gently. "Come on, sweetheart, let Grandma go." Those words echoed in me long after the door closed. Let Grandma go. The drive home. I sat in the car beside Daniel in silence. He tried to make small talk, but every sentence fell flat between us. When we pulled up to my house, he helped me with my bags. "Mom. I hope you're not hurting." I smiled, the same soft, tired smile I had learned to master. "I'll be fine, Daniel." He hugged me one last time, then left. The moment his car disappeared around the corner, I felt the weight of the silence settle onto my shoulders. My house was still the same, the pictures on the walls, the old hallway rug, the scent of lavender from the drawer sachets. But I wasn't the same. I stood in the middle of the living room and whispered to the empty air. How did it come to this? And for the first time, I allowed myself to cry. Not quiet tears. Not soft ones. Real tears. Tears that came from somewhere deep, a place that had been breaking slowly, piece by piece, long before the bowl shattered on the kitchen floor. This was the moment my world truly broke. Not because I left their house. But because, after everything, no one asked why. The first night back home felt unfamiliar, even though I was surrounded by all the things I had lived with for years. My house felt quiet, not the peaceful kind I once cherished, but the hollow kind that echoes back at you when you speak softly into it. I made myself a cup of tea and sat in the living room where Michael and I used to spend our evenings. His picture sat on the bookshelf, smiling gently the way he always had, one hand in his pocket, the other resting on my shoulder in the photo. For the first time in months, I looked at that picture longer than a moment. And as the house breathed around me, I whispered, "I wish you were here. You would know what to say." It felt strange, talking to a man who had been gone for 10 years. But loneliness makes you reach for the familiar, even when it's only in memory. The silence that reveals truth. The next morning, sunlight filled the room, resting delicately on the old wooden table. It should have felt comforting, but instead, it felt like a reminder that my life had shifted back to solitude. I spent the morning cleaning, not because it needed it, but because I needed something to keep my hands busy. The rhythm of sweeping, dusting, wiping, it grounded me. But no matter how much I tried to distract myself, I kept hearing Daniel's voice in my mind. "Mom, maybe we should move up the plan." A plan that I had never agreed to. A plan that made me feel more like a task to be completed than a mother to be cherished. By noon, my chest felt tight. A quiet ache lingered inside me, not just from what happened, but from what had been lost long before I realized it. Family doesn't break in one moment. It breaks slowly. Quietly. Like a rope thinning thread by thread, until the final snap feels sudden even though it wasn't. A visit from someone who still cared. Around 3 in the afternoon, there was a knock on the door. When I opened it, I saw Helen, my neighbor and oldest friend. Her silver hair was pulled back in a loose bun, and she held a small bag with freshly baked muffins. "I heard you came back early," she said, her eyes full of concern. "Can I come in?" I nodded. As soon as she stepped inside, she set the muffins on the table and turned to me with a softness only lifelong friends know how to give. "What happened, Mary?" I didn't have the strength to pretend. Not with her. So the truth came out slowly, haltingly. The broken bowl. The tension. Emily's words. Daniel's silence. My sudden departure. Helen placed her hand on mine. "Oh, sweetheart," she whispered. "You've held so much for so long." I felt my eyes burn with tears again. "I didn't want to burden them," I said. "I didn't want to disrupt their life." "You didn't," she said firmly. "You existed. And sometimes, people forget how to make room for the ones who raised them." Her words hit me like a breath of warm air after standing in the cold too long. "No one asked why," I whispered. "Not even for a second." Helen nodded with a sad smile. "That's because they assumed they already knew the answer." The realization I had avoided. That night, as I lay in bed, I replayed everything, not to hurt myself, but to understand. Where had things gone wrong? Was it when Michael passed away and Daniel became the man of his own house too soon? Was it when Emily married into our family and I didn't carve out space for her to feel secure? Was it when I became quiet instead of honest? Or was it simply life? People grow up. People change. Children build their own worlds. And sometimes, without meaning to, they forget the person who built them. I had been holding on to the idea that Daniel's home was still my home. But it wasn't. Not anymore. That realization didn't erase the pain. But it helped me understand the shape of it. The phone call that shifted everything. The next morning, my phone rang. "Daniel." For a moment, I considered letting it go to voicemail. But I answered. "Hi, Mom," he said carefully. "Hello, Daniel." There was silence. A long one. The kind you can hear someone thinking through. "I just wanted to check on you," he said. "Did you get home okay?" "I did. How are you feeling?" "I'm managing," I replied softly. Another pause. Then he asked. "Mom, are you upset with us?" I took a breath. A long one. A necessary one. "I'm not upset," I said. "I'm hurt. But not upset." His voice cracked slightly. "I didn't want it to feel like we were pushing you away." "It did," I whispered. "But I know you didn't mean to." He sighed heavily. "Emily didn't sleep much last night. She kept saying she feels guilty." Guilt. The companion of truth. "Daniel," I said gently, "I don't want guilt between us. I never wanted that. You and Emily have your life. Your routines. Your home. And I need to find my place in mine." He was quiet for a long time. "Mom. I love you." I closed my eyes. "I know you do. But love and presence are not the same." A small step toward healing. After we hung up, I felt a strange mixture of sadness and peace. Sadness because things had changed in a way I could never fully repair. Peace because acceptance had finally settled into the corners of my heart. That afternoon, I took out an old photo album, one filled with pictures of Daniel as a child. There he was with frosting on his cheeks during his 5th birthday. There he was missing his 2 front teeth. There he was, smiling beside Michael during a fishing trip. I traced my fingers over the photos and whispered. "You were my everything. And now you belong everywhere else." It wasn't bitterness. It wasn't regret. It was understanding. A mother's love doesn't disappear. But it does shift. A decision that set the path forward. By evening, I made a quiet decision. I wouldn't wait for Daniel to invite me back. I wouldn't sit by the phone waiting for Emily's guilt to turn into apology. I wouldn't measure my worth by how welcome I felt in someone else's home. I would build something for myself. A life that didn't depend on being needed in someone else's routine. And I would start small. A garden. A church visit. A dinner with Helen. A walk in the park. A routine of my own. Because sometimes loneliness is not the absence of people. It is the absence of yourself. And I was ready, slowly, gently, to return to myself. The next day, I woke up earlier than usual, before the sun had even considered rising. The house was still wrapped in darkness, but it didn't feel as heavy as before. There was a strange kind of stillness, the kind that signals a beginning rather than an ending. I slipped on my old slippers, the ones Michael used to tease me about, and walked to the kitchen. The floor felt cool under my feet. I brewed myself a cup of chamomile tea and sat by the window. Outside, the sky slowly shifted from charcoal to pale blue. Birds began to chirp in the distance. And for the first time in a long time, the silence felt like company, not punishment. The invitation I didn't expect. Around mid-morning, there was another knock on my door. This time, it wasn't Helen. It was Grace, my old friend from church. Her kind eyes softened when she saw my face. "Mary. I heard you're back. I figured today might be hard." I stepped aside, letting her in. Grace carried a small tote bag filled with fruit, bread, and a jar of homemade soup. "I don't want to pry," she said gently. "But if you want company, I'm here." Something inside me loosened, the kind of loosening that happens when you've been holding your breath too long. We sat at the kitchen table, and I told her everything. Not with dramatic pauses, not with tears falling like rain, just with a quiet, steady voice that had been waiting to release the truth. When I finished, Grace reached across the table and held my hand. "You didn't deserve that, Mary," she said softly. "You deserve kindness." I nodded, not trusting my voice. Then she added something I hadn't expected. "And you deserve a life that doesn't shrink just because someone else's world is getting bigger." Her words lingered. A life that doesn't shrink. I hadn't realized how small I had allowed myself to become, how tightly I folded myself to fit into spaces where I was no longer meant to stay. A memory that brought clarity. After Grace left, I spent the afternoon sorting through drawers I hadn't opened in years. Old letters. Birthday cards. Little notes Daniel wrote when he was in elementary school. One in particular caught my eye. It was a crayon drawing titled, "My Mom Saves Me Every Day." There were stick figures, one taller one pulling a smaller one out of a puddle. The tall one had long hair. The small one had Daniel's exact smile. On the back, in shaky handwriting, he had written, "I love my mom because she always helps me even when I make mistakes." I sat on the couch and held that paper with trembling hands. A soft laugh escaped me, half joy, half ache. "Oh, Daniel," I whispered, "when did you forget that I am still the same mother? Not perfect. Not young. Not as strong as I used to be. But still his mother. And still the same woman who would pull him from any puddle he fell into, no matter how deep." The day I stepped outside again. 2 days later, I decided to leave the house. Not to run from my sadness, but to breathe again. I walked to the local park, a place where Michael and I used to go on summer evenings. The air was cool, the sky gentle, the trees swaying as if whispering small comforts. Children were playing near the swings. A few older men sat on benches talking about baseball. Mothers watched their toddlers make shapes in the sand. Life was happening all around me. Not waiting. Not pausing. Not noticing my heartbreak. And strangely, that felt comforting. I sat on a bench and watched the day move around me, and for a moment, I felt like a small part of a bigger world instead of a forgotten corner in someone else's. An unexpected message. When I returned home, my phone buzzed. A message from Daniel. "Mom, Sophie has been asking about you all day. She drew another picture and wants to call you tonight. Can we video chat? Love you." I felt something warm bloom in my chest. Not because he wrote, "Love you," though that mattered, but because I could feel the sincerity behind it. And I wrote back. Yes, of course. I'd love to talk to her. That evening, Sophie's face filled my screen with a bright smile. "Grandma. I miss you." Her tiny voice filled every quiet corner of my heart. "I miss you too, sweetheart." She held up a new drawing. This one had 3 houses connected by little hearts drawn between them. "This is Mommy and Daddy's house," she said, "and this one is your house, and this one is the house we all share in my imagination." I smiled, blinking back tears. "Oh honey," I said softly, "that's beautiful." Emily appeared in the background then, slightly hesitant. "Hi, Mary." Her voice was quieter than usual. Gentler. A little cracked, like she had been holding something inside. "Hello, Emily," I replied. She opened her mouth to say something, maybe an apology, maybe a half-formed explanation, but she closed it again as Daniel walked into the frame. "We'll call again soon," he said. "We want to make this better, Mom." I nodded. "I know you will." But I also knew something else, something important. I wasn't waiting for them to make it better anymore. I was learning to make myself whole. Finding my own rhythm again. Over the next few days, I created small rituals that helped me breathe easier. Morning tea by the window. Watering the plants I had nearly forgotten. Sorting through old recipes. Calling friends I hadn't spoken to in years. Listening to soft music while folding warm laundry. None of it erased the pain. But every small moment stitched a tiny piece of me back together. People think healing is loud, with breakthroughs and sudden clarity. But real healing is quiet. Slow. A gentle returning to yourself, inch by inch. A moment of unexpected peace. One evening, while preparing a simple dinner, I suddenly felt a calmness fill the room. Not because life was perfect. Not because the loneliness was gone. Not because the hurt had magically disappeared. But because, for the first time since leaving Daniel's house, I felt like I had enough space to exist again. Not as a guest. Not as a burden. But as myself. That realization didn't erase everything that happened. It didn't fix the broken pieces. But it made the pieces easier to hold. And sometimes, that is enough. The mother begins reclaiming her life, reconnecting with herself, and finding strength again. The days that followed blended into a gentle rhythm. Not fast. Not busy. Just steady enough to keep me anchored. Every morning, I opened the windows to let the fresh air sweep through the house. It carried the scent of cut grass, blooming flowers, and sometimes the faint aroma of someone baking bread down the street. It felt like the world's way of saying, "You are still here. You are still part of this." I began cooking again, not for anyone else, just for myself. Simple meals. Warm meals. Meals that reminded me I was still alive, still worthy of nourishment. And every evening, I sat in the quiet of my living room, wrapped in a blanket, listening to the soft hum of the night. It was a lonely peace. But it was peace. And that alone made it precious. A call from an old friend. One afternoon, as I was watering my front garden, my phone rang. Linda, my cousin from Michigan. Her voice was bright, warm, full of that familiar energy I always admired. "Mary. I heard from Helen that you're back home. Are you okay?" I let out a small breath. Some people ask questions to fill silence. Others ask because they truly care. Linda cared. "I'm getting there," I replied. "It's been a lot." She paused for a moment before speaking again. "You know, you should come visit me for a week or two. It might help you clear your mind." I felt a soft tug inside my chest. Visit. Travel. Do something for myself. For months, maybe years, my world had centered around what I could do for other people, what I could fix, what I could adapt to, what I could shrink myself into. The idea of doing something purely for me felt foreign. But it also felt right. I'll think about it, I said gently. Good, Linda replied. Because we both know thinking usually turns into doing. I laughed, really laughed, for the first time in weeks. The first step toward myself. That night, I found myself staring at the calendar on my wall. Each empty square felt like a reminder. This is your life, fill it with something. So I wrote something small inside the next day's box. Take a walk by the lake. It didn't seem like much. But it was movement. A step. The next morning, I dressed in a soft sweater, tied my shoes, and made my way to the lake. The water shimmered under the morning sun. Soft waves lapped against the shore. A few people walked their dogs, greeting me with warm smiles. I inhaled deeply, letting the crisp air soothe the ache inside me. As I walked, a memory surfaced, Daniel at 5 years old, holding my hand as we walked around this same lake. Back then, he paused every few minutes to show me rocks, flowers, and sticks he found important. Mom, look. This one is special. Everything he touched was magical. Everything was a treasure. I smiled at the memory. It didn't hurt anymore. It simply felt sweet. That's when I realized something important. Pain doesn't disappear. It softens. It blends into the fabric of your life until it becomes just one thread among many. A message that came at the right time. The next day, as I was making lunch, my phone buzzed. Daniel. Not a call, a message. Mom, I've been thinking about everything that happened. I'm sorry. I didn't handle it right. Emily didn't either. We want to talk whenever you're ready. Love you. I sat down slowly, letting the words sink in. It wasn't a perfect apology. It wasn't full of explanations. But it was real. Honest. Human. And for a son who often struggled to express feelings, it meant something. I typed back. Thank you for saying that. I'm healing. We'll talk soon. I didn't offer a date. I didn't make myself available instantly. I was learning that my time, my space, mattered too. Creating joy where sadness once lived. In the following days, I turned my attention to small joys. I planted new flowers in my garden, lavender, daisies, and something the woman at the plant shop called moonshine yarrow. I chose it because the name made me smile. I rearranged the furniture in my living room, shifting things to create more light, more openness. I placed fresh lemons in a bowl on my kitchen counter because they reminded me of summertime with Michael, lemonade, warm evenings, and soft conversations on the porch. And slowly, the house began to feel like home again. Not a place filled with memories of loss. A place filled with possibilities. The letter I never sent. One evening, after dinner, I sat at my desk with a pen and paper. I didn't plan to write. But the words just came. Dear Daniel. Being a mother means loving without conditions, without boundaries, without needing anything in return. But it also means learning when to let go. I will always love you, not because I must, but because every part of me wants to. What happened hurt me deeply, but it also opened my eyes to something I had forgotten. I have a life too. Not just as your mother. But as myself. I hope we find our way back to each other in a healthier way. Not through guilt. Not through obligation. But through real connection. Love always. Mom. I folded the letter gently. But I didn't mail it. Some things aren't meant to be sent. They're meant to be understood quietly, privately, by the person who writes them. The sunset that softened everything. A few evenings later, I stepped outside to watch the sunset. The sky glowed with soft hues of orange, pink, and gold. Clouds drifted lazily like they had nowhere urgent to be. As I stood there, hands wrapped around a warm cup of tea, a sense of peace washed over me. Not the kind that comes from everything being fixed, but the kind that comes from knowing you are slowly becoming whole. And I whispered to the fading light, I am still here. I am still myself. And I am still worth loving. The wind carried the words away gently, as if agreeing with them. The porch light hummed softly as evening settled in, and for a moment I simply listened, to the small sounds of my house, the distant call of a car, the gentle rustle of leaves. Those ordinary noises felt like company now, not reminders of what I had lost. I wrapped my shawl tighter around my shoulders and thought about how quiet mornings used to frighten me, now they felt like a promise. A few weeks later, Daniel, Emily, and Sophie came for dinner again. This time there was no stiffness waiting at the door, only the shy joy of people who had practiced how to be gentle with one another. We ate slowly, laughed at Sophie's dramatic retelling of a school play, and listened to the ordinary, comforting sound of cutlery on plates. When Daniel reached across the table and held my hand, it felt like a bridge built one careful board at a time. The changes weren't sudden. They never are. There were days when old hurts peeked through, a misread glance, a quiet that felt too long, and I would breathe through them, remember my new boundaries, and choose kindness over bitterness. Emily and I learned to speak differently. She began to ask instead of assume, and I began to say what I needed without shrinking back. We found new rhythms, shared recipes, a Saturday morning to plant flowers with Sophie, small routines that mended the seams between us. One afternoon, Helen and I walked by the lake where I had first breathed in the idea of living for myself again. We sat on a bench and watched children skip stones while the sun painted the water. Helen squeezed my hand and said, "You were brave to let go and brave to come back." Her words felt true. I had let go of the life I thought I needed. In doing so I found a life I chose. There was a letter I never mailed, the one I wrote to Daniel and folded into a neat square. I kept it in the top drawer of my desk, not as proof of something undone, but as a reminder of the voice I had reclaimed. Sometimes I read it aloud, quietly, to remember the woman who could love without losing herself. At night, when the house is still, I sometimes speak to Michael as if he's standing in the kitchen beside me. I tell him about small victories, the first time Sophie danced in my living room, the new friend I met at the library, how lavender is finally thriving in the garden. I say thank you for the life we had and for the lessons that came after. It comforts me to believe he would smile and tell me I did well. If there is one thing I want anyone who hears this story to take away, it is this: families shift and people change, and sometimes love looks like stepping back so others can breathe. But love should never make you disappear. You are not less because someone else needs space. You are not less because seasons of life demand new arrangements. Find the small things that remind you who you are: a walk, a recipe, a phone call with an old friend. Say what you need with a soft voice if that is your way. Set gentle boundaries and hold them like flowers that need sun. Forgiveness will come in its own time, and so will peace. You do not have to wait for others to give you permission to live fully. The last image I want to leave with is simple: Sophie running ahead down our street, her laugh like a ribbon in the wind, Daniel walking slowly beside her, and me, steady, with a small bag of seeds in my hand, planting a row of daisies that will bloom next spring. The house is not perfect. Neither am I. But there is sunlight on the windowsill, and that will do for now.